David Kelly, former chief of the famed Southern District of New York, my former boss, and Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney as well. So it's a tie in rank. You both have held that top post, which is a big deal. But given all the intrigue in New York, David, I will start with you. When you take it all together, I mentioned they have Donald Trump in common. Sometimes I ask questions that are very, hopefully very sophisticated. That one was very simple, David, for the simple point that it's rare to see this many lawyers in this much heat. I'm curious what you think about first New York, where the new Trump lawyer blames the old one, and then any thoughts on Washington.
That's a lot to unpack there, Ari. Yeah, there's a lot of lawyers involved. I think largely because a lot of lawyers don't want to hang around for the mess that their client pushes them through. It's interesting to see what's going on in New York. I think what's most interesting about New York is, number one, obviously there's a lot of struggle going on in the district attorney's office about how to ultimately deal with this case, or at least it appears that way. But what's really troubling, and I think you addressed some of this last night, was, the threats out there. And, you mentioned at the top of the hour here, Mr. Bragg having received the envelope with the white powder in it. And, look, you see out in public the threats by President Trump with the baseball bat swinging at the picture of Alvin Bragg. I mean, he may have opened himself up to yet another offense, a terrorist threat, which would be serious, menacing, reckless endangerment, all of which, frankly, speak to a kind of a consciousness of guilt, I think, from the perspective of a prosecutor. So I think it's interesting to see how this plays out and whether or not they might even add some charges to his threatening behavior. But kind of getting back to your question, it's really hard to think about, sure, they're going to do everything they can to attack Michael Cohen. I think they're going to have as much ammunition there is with regard to him. I think ultimately somebody who takes out a home equity loan to kind of arbitrarily pay a porn star is doing it not because it's enjoyable to him, but because his boss has directed him to do it. So I think no matter how much they throw at him, whether it's a lawyer or somebody else, they're going to have a problem. With regard to the things in Washington, I think what's most interesting here is what we're seeing in terms of the executive privilege, what we're seeing with regard to the attorney-client privilege, what we're seeing with regard to, particularly with regard to former Vice President Pence and the speech and debates clause. These are all very rare, kind of very narrow loopholes that Trump's lawyers are twisting themselves into pretzels in order to try to fit through. And I think that too tells you how desperate they are to avoid transparency, regardless of what the truth is. The transparency here, or efforts to avoid it, pretty much tells you how fearful they are of the truth coming out.
Joyce?
So I think David's right on the money. And, we're both former U.S. attorneys, but within the U.S. attorney community, the Southern District of New York is sometimes referred to as the first among equals. And that's because former U.S. attorneys in David's position have dealt with a lot of complicated issues. And these cases present a lot of complicated, confusing issues. He's right to say that when we look at the Washington, D.C. aspect of this, there's the prospect of appeals that will go up to the Supreme Court, because some of these issues are so inside baseball. But they all come down to the same thing. Will prosecutors get the testimony that they need to get to the truth? In every criminal case, people who are fact witnesses are required to respond to federal subpoenas and to state subpoenas. Here we have a number of witnesses who've said, for whatever reason, that they are privileged from testifying. And now we're seeing the court say, no, you're not. Just like in any other criminal case, prosecutors need to get to the bottom of this. And so we have central witnesses like Mark Meadows, who was around Donald Trump on January 6th, saw the entire course of conduct, people in his national security apparatus, incredibly important witnesses like Mike Pence, the sole witness privy to his personal interactions with Donald Trump. That all happens on the one hand, At the same time, Alvin Bragg is obviously very close to making a charging decision in a case that could have great implications for the former president. And what do we see Trump doing? We see him threatening people. We see him posting pictures that if he were any other defendant in any other case would cause a judge to speak to him sharply. There's always a little bit of a special rule that seems to get applied to Trump, but I think that's coming to an end. We saw that in the quick action in court in D.C. I think increasingly we'll see courts that are out of patience with the former president.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's that sort of larger trend line that you can see. You both gave us very complex breakdowns of all of this. I want to now do kind of a lightning round. So in about 30 seconds or so on the federal ruling in D.C. Saying that there's evidence Trump likely committed crimes, which is why they shredded the privilege, on a scale of no biggie to medium to a big deal. How do you rate that kind of ruling? First, Joyce.
So it's huge. What this comes down to is someone obstructed justice. The special counsel is trying to figure out who. Evan Corcoran has now gone in and testified. That suggests that it's not him, and that leaves one person, Donald Trump.
David?
Well, it went to the D.C. court. It went to the D.C. circuit. And the ruling that came out affirming the district court's ruling, I wouldn't go to 1 to 10. I'd go earthquake status because that's a really big deal. I mean, how often do you appear to get a clean sweep on an attorney-client privilege, piercing of that privilege? So this is a big deal. And clearly, the government would not have tried to do that unless they thought Corcoran had very important and significant information. They would not have burned a chip with the court on this unless they really had a big piece to chew on, and they convinced the court of just that.